As we go through life, so many of us try to avoid the inevitable, fear. But there are those few that seek only this fear, like those of you who clicked on this video. For that, I thank you. But by the end, you may not be thanking me. So lock your doors, bar your windows, turn out the lights, and prepare for The Analogist by The Shadow. Now relax. This won't hurt too much. After many years at this office, it's just too much to handle. For example, I'll tell you one of the things that happened today. Hank poked his head over the cubicle wall, as he always has, but when I turned to look at him, his face began to melt. I mean, literally, it was melting. I think that it's my fault that things have gotten this bad. Now most of my fellow co-workers won't even speak to me, instead casting angry glances in my direction. It's not my fault I was born with this gift, but I never expected things to turn out this way. I guess I'll start at the beginning, back when I was graduating. I was asked to give a speech to my fellow graduates, and so I was like, okay, no problem. My public speaking record was untarnished, and I had a certain flair for writing a good speech, and many a good analogy as well. I'll give you an example about my predicament with my wife. Our marriage is like a deck of cards. Each card represents a week, and while there are varying colors, the cards all turn out the same in the end. Now that deck of cards is buried, that bitch finally dropping dead from a massive stroke. Anyway, I digress. A good analogy can do that to you, you know? I remember the first time I gave that analogy. We had been arguing a lot, and it was nearly silent at the dinner table, with our few close friends being there for the weekly dinner party. I knew something was wrong after I said those words, and I stared in disbelief as I watched my wife's body go limp, her face falling into the plate of chicken and potatoes in front of her. I was in shock, the only rational reaction being to laugh when our, now just mine, friends were splattered lightly with the gravy that covered the mountain of potatoes on a plate. Truth be told, I really don't care if you judge me. I've had many years to sort through that shit. Wow, I'm really off topic here. Okay, so I had just finished giving my speech and walked off the stage to a thunderous applause. It wasn't my best speech, but apparently it was good enough for the commoners, so what the hell, I'll let them have their fun. After finding my seat, a guy tapped me on the shoulder, congratulating me on a speech well done. I nodded modestly, my usual reaction to congratulations, and then I noticed the man, which turned out to be the world-renowned speechwriter, Gilbert Partridge. I was in awe, being so close to such a famous person, and was rendered speechless when he asked me to come and work with him. This leads me to my rut now, with things going so stale. About a month ago, things seemed to be a bit more off than usual. It coincided with the death of Gilbert, something that still troubles me to this day. Back in his heyday, he was known as the Analogist, a term given to him by his therapist. With his passing, the torch was passed to me. The office I worked in was filled with people like me, but not like me at all. Sure, some of them were pretty decent at writing speeches, but none of them had the insight and talent that I did when it came to a good analogy. I think I realized that my gift of analogizing had a more sinister, supernatural side to it when I went to speak with Gilbert the day he died. He had been looking more sickly than I could ever remember, and I was worried. I knocked, then entered. He sat slumped over his desk, and I thought him to be dead right away, but then he let out a small cough and sat up, alerted by my presence. My brow was furrowed in worried sympathy, something Gilbert noticed right away. He asked me what was up, and so I told him. "You look as if you were a load of white laundry that someone threw a red hat in with." Gilbert smirked, and then his eyes rolled back into his head and he fell onto the table. I just stood there, mouth agape. The thud of his head hitting the desk must have been louder than I thought, and I just stood there, guppying as the receptionist came in. She called 911, and then turned her attention to me, shouting, "Why didn't you call 911? What have you done?" I just shook my head, holding my breath as the odor of shit began to invade the room. I took a week off work following that incident, and when I could bring myself to return to work, it was never the same. My coworkers regarded me as if I were an alien, as if I were responsible for the death of Gilbert, but I couldn't really defend myself now, could I? The cause of death was determined to be a stroke, not surprising given what had happened previously. I personally think that my analogies were just too potent, the intense accuracy and vivid visualizations brought on with each causing his head to simply explode. But that makes no sense, at least not in this case. It has been damn near impossible not to give it more analogies here, but as you might have already guessed, it's harder to resist than a chocolate-covered bowl of ice cream. Shit. Oh well, that wasn't so bad. There's a bowl of ice cream in front of me now. So, how many of you have said to yourselves as you read this, "Hey, why don't you just give analogies that are helpful? You'll be so much better off." I was just getting to that, okay? I vowed after unintentionally killing the first analogist to only do good with my words, but I guess you can see how that turned out, am I correct? It started the day after I got back to work, with my neighbor in the cube farm poking his head over the wall. There was a woman that worked 2 cubes down, a rather beautiful one, who was always smiling, everybody's friend. I mean, you know the type. That day, she was looking rather glum, and as we looked over at her, she turned to face in our general direction, and that's when we saw what the reason for her glumness was. Her eyes were nearly swollen shut, blacker and bluer than a stormy sky at dusk. We both recoiled at the sight of Jen's face in that battered state, and being the way I am, well, I don't take shocking sights in the most appropriate way. If I see a car accident, I'll make a joke. If someone close to me dies, I'll have a fallacious theory as to how it happened, and these are often accompanied by laughter. Yes. So I turned to Hank and said something like, "Gee, if a prizefighter looked at her, he'd be impressed." Hank looked at me as if I were Elvis, back from the dead and better than ever. That was the last time I truly spoke to him. I don't have many friends, or people I can connect with, but Hank was one of those few people, and so I felt a sense of loss as I realized I had chased someone else away with my twisted mind. There was a point that I grew very irritated with every one of my coworkers shunning me, treating me like less of a man, and so I started to go into overdrive. I would think of an analogy for each one of them, and as I looked at them, I would repeat it to myself over and over in my mind. I watched people bend over backwards, jump out of windows trying to fly like an eagle, and now Hank, whose skin now had the consistency of melted ice cream. Oh shit. My ice cream just melted all over my desk. See what I mean? These analogies are driving me crazy, ruining my life. I need to figure out my best analogy ever, so I can go out with a bang. Nothing happened. Maybe if I break the analogy up into separate words, I could avoid having things go horribly wrong. Ah! Now the ice cream is dripping onto my pants. This is just going so horribly wrong. I finally came up with a perfect analogy, one that will rid me of this curse, and all of these haters of my enormous talent. Here it is. How am I supposed to keep going when I just keep bombing? I was smart enough to make sure I was out of the building before saying those words, and I now stand in the rubble, covered from head to toe in dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust is pretty good to sum up all this, isn't it? Now, like my career as the analogist, I must light a fire under my ass to get on with my... Ah! My ass is on fire! The better the analogy, the more powerful everything described is, I guess.